My name is Taylor Rose and welcome back to my channel where we talk about books. This wrap up is actually going to cover 2 months, February and March. If you haven't been following me, kind of fell off the face of the earth, but I am back. So this video is going to be longer than normal. Pop in your earbuds, go do some chores around the house. It'll be great. The first book that I finished in February was Wolfworm by T. Kingfisher. I've read one other book by her, I think, for this channel, and this was my first foray into her horror side. So she does kind of write two types of books, fantasy and horror, under this pen name, T. Kingfisher. And this one was on NetGalley as an audiobook. I thought, I'll give it a try, and it was amazing. I am not like a huge horror person. I don't like torture-y stuff. I don't like abuse against women or animals. And this one does have a little bit of animal-y stuff, but it's not targeted, I guess you could say, against like pets or something. It's just like wild animals in distress, which is easier for me to stomach. While I did read it when it was an ARC, it has been published as of March 24th, so a few weeks ago. If you're into something creepy, I definitely recommend it. Basically, it's kind of like a historical fantasy. It is set in 1899, and the main character, Sonia Wilson, is a scientific illustrator. Obviously, before the widespread access to cameras and stuff, scientists would have illustrators come and draw their work. So illustrating specimens, internal organs, that sort of thing for their papers. So the main character, Sonia, has kind of gotten into a predicament when her father passed. She was doing work for him, but really nobody is offering her anything. So as a last-ditch effort, she takes a position with this really reclusive doctor, basically in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina. So Sonia shows up. He's just as crotchety and reclusive as she anticipated he would be, but, you know, she's gung-ho about it. She's trying to prove she has the experience able to do this job. However, almost immediately, things start getting creepy. You know, there's kind of really nobody at the house other than Dr. Hayter, the cook, and the gardener handyman type figure. So they're pretty isolated. She's finding all this evidence about her predecessor, who is actually Dr. Halder's wife, and kind of, why aren't people talking about her? Like, what's the big secret? What's been going on here? Why are the animals acting so strangely? Possums and, you know, wild animals acting kind of weird. The insects that Dr. Halder's having her draw are pretty spooky and they're just gross. And there are rumors going around about some murderous people. And so Sonia's like, well, what in the world? And people are like, don't go out in the woods. And she's like, I don't know what I've gotten myself into, but she just keeps investigating, kind of. I wouldn't say that she's like a serious investigative crime solving type person. She's just trying to find evidence to answer some questions she has. So she's an inquisitive person, but like if you're expecting some sort of like murder mystery, connect the dots, clue type thing, that is not it. And so as Sonia is investigating with the help of the cook, the housekeeper, and a local healer to the area, Sonia starts discovering more about Halder's studies and his obsession with these parasitic maggots. I was listening to this as I cleaned my house, and I was just in my kitchen, scrubbing the counters, screaming, no, about like 60-75% of the way through this book. It was, whew, I think it was like the perfect amount of horror. It wasn't gratuitous, but it was enough to make you feel kind of like queasy, and the level of suspense was just impeccable. I highly recommend it. And like, I'm a weenie baby about scary things, but maybe what I find scary is not typical. I don't know. Like, my husband keeps trying to get me to watch Saving Private Ryan for some reason, and I just cannot stop crying during the first like 10 minutes. So he always turns it off and puts on Tangled, which is like my comfort movie. But I really liked this. I thought this was like the perfect level of spookiness and creepy crawly grossness. Fantastic. I give it 5 stars. I really loved it. After I finished Wolfworm, I decided to go on and read another book by T. Kingfisher, Snake Eater. And I was first alerted to this one because Reads with Rachel did a video on it, and it was published in last year. But on Kindle Unlimited, there was actually the audiobook. So I needed something else to listen to, so I just started right on it. And I will say, I did not like this book, Snake Eater, as much as I've liked other things by T. Kingfisher. And I think it's because this one is set more in like a contemporary setting. Obviously, Wolfworm is set in our world, real life North Carolina, but you know, it's historical. It's like 130 years ago or whatever. Whereas this was definitely meant to be set in, I mean, from my reading of the story, current times. And as someone with an anxiety disorder, the main character has a lot of anxiety, and it was a little too close to home for me to really feel entertained, I guess you could say. But that isn't to say the book was badly done or something. Snake Eater takes place in New Mexico. Well, or I'm pretty sure it's New Mexico. It might be Arizona, but it's like definitely southwestern. The main character, Selena, goes with her dog, Copper, to this small little desert town where her aunt lives. She is escaping an abusive relationship with her fiance and is hoping that her aunt will shelter her. You know, she doesn't have money. She doesn't have a car. She spent the last of her bank account on a bus ticket to the middle of nowhere. And unfortunately, when she shows up, she is told that her aunt actually passed away. Her aunt is gone. And so Selena has no one else to turn to. I mean, her fiance is abusive. Her mom kind of has this like religious psychosis thing and was also not a very present mother. So like she can't go to her. Her aunt was her last shot at freedom. And so Selena, of course, is freaking out. Like, what is she supposed to do? But luckily, the people of Quartz Creek are very welcoming and open their arms to her. And they let her stay in her aunt's house. And, you know, Selena, of course, is in disbelief because why would they be so nice to her? Essentially, how is she supposed to make how is she supposed to make money? Yada, yada. But, you know, life there is working out. You know, the beautiful scenery. There's no cell service basically, or her cell phone breaks or something. So like, she's like, oh, no internet, disconnected. Nobody can reach her. She starts, you know, calming down. Basically, her nervous system is starting to equalize. And then some strange stuff starts happening. There is a god, so to speak, that's what they're calling them, that lives in her garden. It's the little squash god. And her neighbor, who kind of takes her under her wing, Grandma Billy, starts telling her about the culture in the area. And Selena also befriends the local priest. And the dynamic between the priest and Grandma Billy was so funny. I was laughing out loud at their interactions because when one of these local gods starts antagonizing Selena, they come together to help her figure out what exactly this god wants, what can Selena do to calm the situation, and what exactly did Selena's late aunt have to do with what's going on. Right? Spoiler alert, that god is Snake Eater, a Roadrunner god. So, you know, I loved the plot. I loved all the side characters, but the main character and the dog sidekick, loved it. But The main character's anxiety spirals were just like too relatable, too relatable for me to be like super immersed in the story, which I guess is actually kind of a bonus, a talking point about the book. In that, like, I think it was done very realistically, but yeah, if you live in the throes of anxiety, maybe this is not the book for you. I did listen to the audiobook. I think if I had been reading text, I probably would have DNF'd at some point just because of the anxiety thing. But at least with the audiobook, it kind of carries you along. So I personally found that helpful. After those two books, which both did take place on Earth, I decided I wanted to read something a little more high fantasy. So I started The Starving Saints by Caitlin Starling. And this came out last year. So it is on Kindle Unlimited right now. And this book was so bizarre. If you like stories where it is kind of hard to understand, like things aren't being super explained to you, it's like kind of left up to interpretation, you would probably really like this. The Goodreads synopses described it as a transfixing fever dream of medieval horror, which I agree with that. It was, I did think it left off a little too ambiguously for me to give this 5 stars. So I did give it 4 stars, but I loved how it was written. Basically, in The Starving Saints, you are in Aymar Castle, and I'm probably mispronouncing these names because I did not use the audiobook for this, but Aymar Castle has been under siege for 6 months. So at this point, food is running low. Backup hasn't arrived despite numerous messengers being sent out. And, they are going to have to resort to something. People are starving to death. And when the king, who is there at the castle, decides to permit, initially a large group of people died together. So they were all buried and stuff. But then one guy dies like a week or 2 later. And so the king permits them to butcher him, and they're going to serve him to the people. And this sparks something strange. So there are 3 POV characters in this story. One is Servoin, who is the kind of right-hand man of the king. Right-hand woman. She's a knight, but she is feeling resentful because, her value has always been in being a very proficient soldier, being violent, causing violence. And here she is having to basically be like a peacekeeper and isn't doing a great job about it. And she feels like the king is kind of disrespecting her in a way. Especially given some past events that we're getting flashbacks to with Servoin. This is contrasted with Phocine, who is an ex-nun. The king has enlisted to make food, bring food from somewhere, create it, because she is a sorceress type figure. She managed to clean the water within the castle grounds. It was contaminated, people were getting sick, but through some miraculous stuff, she fixed the water with a fancy powder she made. And so the king, hearing this is like, okay, well, clearly you can create food from something, get it together. And this is kind of like she's in conflict with the head nun, who is, kind of used to providing these types of answers through their religious belief system, basically. Meanwhile, Phocine ditched their religion and is being very secretive and weird, locked up in her tower. So the king forces Servoin to kind of serve Phocine, to force her to come up with a solution, because Phocine is very disorganized, she's paranoid, she's just kind of descending into madness. And so the king thinks Servoin will be able to force Phocine into creating this magical food source, basically. The third POV is a serving girl at the castle named Trela, who has history with Servoin and is trying to get revenge because of backstory. And she is very familiar with starvation and hardship. So she has been preparing for this secretly behind everyone's backs because she knows, like, it's every man for themselves. They're eventually going to have to resort to cannibalism. She is going to find a way out and get her revenge on Servoin at the same time. Fingers crossed. So once the king allows them to be cannibals, basically, secretly, they're going to lie to the people and make them eat this guy. All of a sudden, bam, at the gates stand their gods. There is the constant lady, who is kind of like the head god, and then the others. I think there's 4 total. And so, of course, the head nun is like, she immediately knows something is off, but everyone else just like falls at the feet of these gods, fully believing that they are there for benevolent purposes, to help everyone. But Trela, Phocine, Servoin, and then the head nun all have, you know, reservations about what's going on and are trying to figure out a way out of this situation as everyone is pulled into these, like, basically the gods lead these like weird drug-fueled orgies and these feasts that like Phocine knows that they're eating rotten food, but everyone else thinks it's good, nice food that you want to eat and that sort of thing. So it was just like so weird. But I loved the experience reading it. And the prose I thought was very artistic. I loved the world building around the religion and like how they use honey for this. I will say just I was kind of a little too confused about the bargaining between the gods and people at certain points, and between like other magical entities and things, and between each other. And while I was reading, I didn't really have an issue with it until I got to the author's note at the end where because at that point I was kind of thinking like, oh, it's like the Fae, you know, they have their own weird rules that like humans don't necessarily need to understand. But then in the author's note is talking about how it's she was like basing this off of medieval chivalry type things. And that's kind of when it lost me. Even though I read that after I finished the book, because it didn't feel consistent enough while reading for me to believe that this was based off of a real system, if that makes sense. But that being said, I think if you just overlook that, the reading experience is still good, and like seeing how everything gets resolved at the end was super interesting. Seeing how the characters, you know, push and pull against each other. It is sapphic. There are women loving women, but it was kind of weird. People are assuming that it ended up, spoiler alert, in a throuple, and I didn't get that vibe really almost at all. And then there's not really a conclusion in terms of that. So I don't know. I've just saw a bunch of reviews being like, ooh, sapphic polyamory. And I was like, I don't think there was a amory part between some of these characters, but you know, whatever. That's fine. You might have a different opinion. Otherwise, I liked it. I just maybe wish it had been a little tighter at the end. After that, I tried another audiobook, but this was for like a short story. It was a Amazon original story, Cronus, by P. Jelly Clark, where it was a super interesting concept that I think would have made a very good book, but as it stands, I did not really like the short story form, if that makes sense. Basically, the year's 2030. We're following a young woman named Annabeth who works at Cronus, which is a time travel company. And so rich people, cough, cough, white people, use this time travel basically mostly to go back in time and witness various atrocities and kind of like, haha, this is why racism's great. It is basically what they're doing. And she suddenly remembers in a historical event that didn't happen. and she is like, this was so weird. She attempts to go see her adoptive brother, but finds out that he has this madness that somehow pretty much only Black people are getting, where they're imagining historical events. And so she obviously is concerned because, you know, now her brother is going to be locked up forever. What if she also has this? She had a vision when she runs into an ex-girlfriend who kind of says, hey, I'm part of this thing. Do you want in on it? Where they are trying to they're going to break into Cronus to go back in time and fix history. Because what has happened is people have gone back, meddled with the past, and rewritten over into this like racist wet dream of a future. And so these people want to go back in time and restore the correct timeline where like Obama became president and all this stuff. It is unclear where history changed. Obviously, I think the implication is that the civil rights movement ever happened. So they changed way back then. But sometimes it also sounded like it was only different from like the 90s. I don't know. That's where I felt like it probably would have been better as a full book. I also really, really dislike the trope where someone with zero experience about a thing, anything, rolls up, meets experts of that thing, and then somehow they have an idea that the experts never thought of, and they're just mind-blowing, and now, oh my god, you need to be a lead on this project. It never hits for me. And that's kind of what they did here. Like, yeah, Annabeth works at Cronus, so she has more insider knowledge, I guess, on like how the machines work and stuff, which is why they want her, because like she can get them access to the building and things. But I don't know. I just find it hard to believe that people who have been planning this, I mean, I don't know what you would call it, kind of a coup, for years, all of a sudden need some random girl to show up and be like, actually, if we're gonna do this, we need to really do this. Oh my gosh, we've never thought of that before, because they want to go back and fix history, and she's basically like, no, we're gonna make history better, basically. I don't know. I don't like it. Like, it's one thing to give a different perspective, which, like, I can respect that. I can respect bringing in a new person who has a different perspective that changes how things are going to play out. But having that new person come in with the solution, I don't like. So I felt that really kneecapped this story. I think if it was a book and had been expanded on a little more in terms of like the world building and what exactly they were going to go do, it would have been more interesting. I don't know why I just couldn't wrap my head around the fact that it being 2030. Like, because it made it seem like, ooh, time traveling stuff's been invented very recently. And it's like, I can't believe that in 4 years we're gonna have time travel. I don't know. I just couldn't. I didn't like that part either. But that's just me being nitpicky. I don't know. I think I would have preferred it if it was like alternate history. Like, what if we came up with time travel previously? Which then begs the question, why can't I be okay with time travel set in this year? I don't know. After that, I moved on to The Governess's Guide to Spells and Managing Misfit Marquesses by Amy Rose Bennett. This was also a NetGalley arc, but it was published March 31st of this year. So since I've read it, it has been published, and I had some very mixed feelings about this book. It was very cute. It was like kind of Mary Poppins-esque with the whole magical governess nanny type figure who is going to save children. But it was also extremely graphic. So basically, we are following Hermina Davenport and her ward, her student. She was governing when his grandmother dies. His care is sent over to his uncle. So the uncle will only inherit the money and stuff to take care of the Viscount, if he has like physical control over the child. So he has to be like physically raising the boy. But the uncle is trying to take the boy onto a Arctic exploration seafaring journey, which like is super dangerous. And so Hermina is like, this is a plot to kill him. Like, no, I can't let this little boy be sent to the Arctic Circle where he is most certainly going to die. So she breaks on to the ship as it's departing, grabs the orphan boy, and tries to portal late, or whatever it's called, back to land, but she basically uses a magic key on a door. And unfortunately, that door goes into another ship. So she has to somehow pretend that, oh, tee-hee-hee, I accidentally walked on the wrong ship, sorry. And of course the guy who owns the ship doesn't believe her, but he thinks she's smoking hot. So he kind of like, I'll overlook it. It looks like this woman and her son are in danger. And so she makes her escape with her ward, her charge. And through shenanigans, the guy who owned the ship, Lord Kinsale, he takes in an orphan specifically to have Hermina be the governess of the orphan, but to relieve him of his stutter and his like super thick Irish accent. Because the English, my brain just, the seat of lords, parliament, they think he's an idiot basically because he's Irish and stutters. So he, obviously wants to promote laws and things to better the lives of his countrymen. He grew up poor and inherited suddenly. So like he wants to help people who are like him, not him inheriting rich people stuff, but other poor people. And so he thinks for some reason Hermina, Miss Davenport, will be able to help him with this. So he like finagles some things to hire her as a governess. And she, while she is working as his governess, brings her son, or I think she first says that it's her son, and then she says, oh, it's my cousin, to like hide the fact that he's this Viscount, even though he's like 9. And meanwhile, she thinks that the guardian of the little boy has been possessed by the evil Fey Queen. And yeah, I don't know. I'm a prude, guys. I thought it was so cute and fun and quirky. And like, yeah, it's written on a kind of a low level, and it does reiterate things every chapter. That's like, I get it. I picked up on that subplot. Thank you. But randomly, it would just go into like, it started talking about how Phineas, Lord Kinsale, gets an erection talking to her at dinner. And then it's talking about how she touches herself at night thinking about him sometimes. And they'll be having a normal conversation. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh my God, I can't stop thinking about her ass under that dress. And it's like, what are we doing? What are we doing? This is so cutesy and written on such, like, this could be a YA. It is written very elementary. But then all of a sudden we're getting super graphic and sexual, and I thought it was so confusing. It just like, that juxtaposition of something that's just like super ultra PG and then bam, rated R. I was just like, I was having whiplash and I didn't like it. I really disliked it, actually, if I'm being honest. It was so hard to finish because I didn't. So if that sort of thing doesn't bother you, I think this was a really solid book. But if you are sensitive to the tone of a story being consistent, you probably also wouldn't like it. I don't know. It was really disappointing. After that, I started reading a duology because I got the second book as an arc. So I read the first book, Lost Souls Meet Under a Full Moon, and it was originally published in 2010 in Japan, and I believe it was first published last year, 2025. So it is by the author Mitsuki Tsujimura, and I loved it. I thought it was super cute. So it is another magical realism. So it's supposed to take place in our world, and then there's like one facet that is strange, magical. And basically, we are following so the first book kind of is like a series of short stories, and then about halfway through, they're tied together and we see the actual main character. So each short story is a person who wants to speak to someone who has died. So they find the go-between, and the go-between facilitates a meeting between the living and the dead. So the first one is about this woman who idolized this idol TV star who unfortunately passed away the year before, and just really wants to talk to her. And so, of course, she like is confused because she shows up and it's this teenager in this like designer jacket who says that he's the go-between. His name's Ayumi. It's just this like cute little short story about the woman meeting the TV star. And then the other one follows an eldest son who ostensibly is wanting to meet his deceased mother to find out where a deed is that he can't locate, but really it's about like his resentfulness kind of towards being an eldest son and feeling like he wasn't prioritized as a person the same way that his siblings were. We also follow a teenage girl who she thinks she caused her best friend's death. And so you're seeing into their like the breakdown of their friendship, and you know how that guilt really is impacting this girl's life. And we also follow a businessman who has been waiting for his fiancée to come home. She disappeared a few days after he proposed, and so he's hoping that she'll come back, but he wants to know finally, is she dead? Obviously, because if she's still alive, the go-between can't facilitate a conversation between them. Meanwhile, as this is going on and we get introduced to Ayumi's point of view, it is talking about like the role of the go-between and how it's impacted his family for centuries, essentially. And it's going into like how he became the go-between and like his relationship with his grandmother who is dying and like having to pass this, you know, monumental task on to him. And it was so good. It was so good. I loved it. I cried on several of the stories. Fantastic. The sequel, How to Hold Someone in Your Heart, was first published in 2019. And it is kind of funny because it is, I think it does take place 9 years later. So kind of like the same amount of time passed, or maybe 7-ish years. But it looks like the arc that I read was published March 17th, 2026. But it is, Kindle does have one from September 2025. So I don't know when exactly it was actually published in English, but book 2 is following Ayumi more closely and reflecting on like how he dealt with the passing of his grandmother, and he's kind of like looking at how it impacted him and his life choices and like what he may or may not have done differently, while again he helps more people with their communications with the dead. There is a film star, like he's kind of a TV star. He wants to talk to the go-between so that the go-between can facilitate a conversation between his co-star, who he likes but won't date him, and her best friend who died in the past. Wink, wink. You might know who they are. And of course, Ayumi's like, unfortunately, no. Well, for this first one, Ayumi has his niece pretend to be the go-between because he knows, oh, I'm too close to this. Like, I can't do it. That film star ends up speaking with his father, who abandoned him when he was a child. And so it's like, you know, going through kind of his issues with his, you know, dad, like the sacrifices that his mom had to make. And The next short story is a amateur historian who is obsessed with this ancient warlord. And so he like has been studying like old Japanese to like try and understand this warlord guy. And he just really wants to know, why did this warlord guy write this poem, that like this love poem, when he didn't really have that kind of relationship with his wife? And people think it's about his wife, but like there's no evidence that he actually liked his wife or that she liked him. Like they didn't have that kind of marriage. And so the guy thinks that he wrote the love letter about the town that he protected during this war. And so he really wants to know the truth about the love letter. And so he gets to talk to this warlord who they're kind of like, it's been several centuries. Someone probably already called him. But then no. And then there is a chef who has been asking to talk to this one woman every few years for decades. But the woman always turns him down. And so Ayumi is learning about why he wants to talk to this particular woman. And that one was rough. Whew. Meanwhile, we are getting more into Ayumi's personal life, like what he's chosen as his career, his interpersonal relationships, how he fits into his family. Like, I felt like the first one kind of dealt with like how grief impacts you, whether it's like anticipatory grief or obviously grief after something happened. And then this one was more about living without regret, in spite of the different types of grief that we face in our lives. I will say I didn't like this one as much as the first one. It didn't feel quite as well structured. The last 40% was very patchworky, piecemeal-y in the scenes, versus the first one, which had very solid, like, short story feelings for each section. So that was kind of my only real complaint about it. Otherwise, very moving. I cried for this one too. The next book I read was another arc from NetGalley. It was the audiobook for Sakura by Kanako Nishi, and that book was originally published in 2005. So this is like the finally we get an English translation. And I don't know, it was so weird. I'm like, why is this like a classic bestseller in Japan? Because some of the weirdest stuff happens. Basically, this one, it bounces back and forth in time between current day and the childhood of the main character, Kaoru. And Kaoru, he gets a letter from his estranged father saying he's going to be home for New Year's. And so Kaoru's like, I have to go home. But it just kind of starts off on a weird foot because he has a new girlfriend who he's like, yeah, I'm dating her because she got a haircut and her hair's cute. What? And then he doesn't want to tell her the truth that like, oh, hey, my estranged father's coming home, so I need to go see him after not having seen him for multiple years. But instead, he's just like, I just want to go home and meet my family dog. And she's like, because New Year's is like a big family time in Japan. It's because he's skipping Christmas, which is like date night central. And so it's like he's skipping like a big lover's holiday to go home. And she's kind of like, what? Okay. But anyways, Kaoru goes home ostensibly to meet his dog, Sakura, who is a Shiba Inu mix. It was kind of weird because they describe her as being like white with a black spot. And then the picture of the dog on the front of the book is a normal red Sesame Shiba Inu. I don't think she's actually red in the book, but whatever. So it's like you see this tension between his family in the current day, his younger sister, his dad, and his mom, and then the things that happened during his childhood to make them like that. Because originally they were like the perfect family, and now they're broken, and you want to know why. And so it was just so weird. It was just so weird, right? So there's Kaoru, his mom, his dad, his older brother, Hajime, and his little sister, Miki. And it kind of goes through his childhood where like he idolized Hajime. Hajime was the handsome one. He got all the girls. Everyone was his friend. They loved him. And he was always, oh, Hajime's little brother, you know. And then kind of the same thing happened with Miki. She's very charismatic and she had lots of friends and she was really cool and stood up for herself and didn't take anyone's shit. And so he was always Miki's older brother. And so like he was living sandwiched in between these like two really charismatic characters. But like some of the short little snippets were so weird. And like Sakura is in the book. She's in all these stories, but like I felt like she should have had a stronger character if she's going to be the titular character, you know? Like she just kind of was like background noise in a lot of these scenes, which, okay. And there were a lot of weird choices in terms of like the focus. So obviously like Kaoru's mom has gained a lot of weight since like the big event that broke their family. And Kaoru just like immediately zooms in on this, like, wow, her ankles are really big. Oh my God, look at her backside. My mom's obese. She's eating like a vacuum. And it's like, what? The hyper specific descriptions of her body parts is what like really got me. Like it's one thing to acknowledge like, yeah, my mom gained weight or my mom lost weight. Like that's visible, but it's another thing entirely to be like, oh my God, my mom's ass is so huge now. Like I can't imagine analyzing my mom's body like that. But he does it multiple times. And there's this like long section on his parents' sex life and how like him and his siblings didn't know what was happening, but then they ask, and then his mom gives this like long convoluted talk on like what sex is to these children. And it was just like really detailed for what I think the talk would be between a parent and their children. But okay. And then there are like multiple points where he points out that his sister's panties can be seen. And I'm like, well, why? Why are we talking about this? And there's a vet who goes to jail because he was molesting dogs. But like his only scenes are they take Sakura to him when she's a puppy and she's so scared of him. She barks for the first time. They took her to the vet because she wasn't making any noise. And so they're like, something's wrong with her. And then she sees this guy and she's scared of him and she barks. And they're like, oh, Sakura's healed. And then they find out later, like, oh no, he was molesting dogs. Good thing he never molested Sakura. And then at the end, the dad is like, we need to take Sakura to the vet. And tries driving to that vet clinic. And then the mom's like, are you an idiot? He was arrested for molesting dogs. It was like, what? Why was this in here? What did that add to the story? I don't know. Like it was funny, but weird. And then there are a few like mentally ill people who these children are tormenting. Well, okay. So there's a scene where Hajime and Kaoru get lost and they are like this smelly homeless man, like kind of tries helping them, but gives them this like weird talk on like the meaning of life and do we ever own anything? I don't know. And they're just like going on about like, oh, I think this dude's crazy. He's unshaven. He's clearly homeless. He smelled bad and he's blind. And I don't know. I think this guy's scary. Which like, okay, yeah, I would also be scared if some smelly dude came up to me when I was in a delicate situation, right? But then he never comes back up. They don't really reflect on like the conversation they had with him. And then later, all the kids torment this guy they call Ferrari because he's like homeless and wears a Ferrari shirt and he just has this like anger problem. So they'll like taunt him so that he chases them and they just keep doing this. And then he has like a mental breakdown and they're like, oh my God, he remembered his real life. And then he runs away and they never see him again. And it's like, why are these children are tormenting this guy who clearly has some sort of like mental disability and nobody's doing anything about it? They just think, haha, how funny, crazy Ferrari. I don't know. I didn't really get what the moral was of that. Like Miki stands up to him to save Hajime because Miki's like weirdly obsessed with Hajime. And she's like, I'm gonna go save my brother. And it's a whole thing. I don't know. So there were just like weird things that I didn't think actually belong. Like it didn't feel constructive to the plot. Because a lot of the family interaction things, like even the weird sex talk, tied into their family dynamics later on. But yeah, I don't know. That being said, I was satisfied by the ending of the story. You know, you learn why Kaoru's family has broken up and why everyone did these weird things that they chose to do around the time of the event. And I did feel like, especially for a Japanese novel published in 2005, it had a uniquely positive discussion around homosexuality and a transgender side character, which was surprising. You know, East Asia, I think, is just kind of more conservative in that regard than the West. Like, that was a pleasant surprise to me. But I don't know. So, like, and I laughed at multiple times, but a lot of times I was sitting there listening to the audiobook like, what did I just listen to? So mixed feelings. I did give it a 4-star for that, even though like I was very satisfied by the ending and like it felt like, I've reached a conclusion with this story and I'm satisfied with what I've learned, but some of it I was just like, so, I mean, I would describe it as a slice of life that gets into really nitty-gritty private details. And while I don't think any of these situations would have ever happened with my family, and definitely did not ever happen with my family, maybe other families do have moments like this. I don't know. They're not my family, so I can't tell you. I would just say if you can't suspend your disbelief on the weird things families will talk to each other about, maybe this wouldn't be for you. But if you're okay with quirky, strange slice of life stuff, you'll probably like this. After that, I went back to horrors, and this was another arc, but I was very late on it. House of Splinters by Laura Purcell. It was actually published last year in October. I know, I was really behind on some of my arcs, but this one was so weird. Not so weird, like good weird. It's like the type of horror that I like. So basically, it is set in, I don't remember if it gives a year, but it feels like 1890s again, like that technology level, where the main character, Belinda, has always lived like under her mother's toe. Her mother is like anxiously paranoid about everything. When her father-in-law dies, keep in mind that Belinda is heavily pregnant and has a toddler. She is super excited really to have an excuse to leave her mother behind in London. And so Belinda and her husband and their children, well, one's in utero, but her child, they go to the bridge, which like is his ancestral family seat. And she's like, finally, I get to establish my own life away from my crazy paranoid mother and her like weird religious psychosis. And I get to be my own person now. However, things are immediately weird. So basically nobody wants to work there. Everyone hates them, like all the tenants. So like the common folk who live and work in the area for the Lord, because before he died, Wilfred's father decided to destroy basically there's like a common area that the people are allowed to use for their own food, their own animals, etc. And whatever happens there, the common, like they don't have to give it to the Lord. Basically, you know, the work that they do in the fields is so that they can live there, but everything belongs to the Lord. So he gets all of those crops, but they get to eat what they grow separately in this other little garden. And his father had decided to like bulldoze that and put in another field that the common people can't use. And so part of that is chopping down this like really old tree that those people worship. And so they're mad. They think Wilfred's going to stop it, but Wilfred's like, it's already been paid for. Like, I can't stop it. And so everyone hates Wilfred now. Belinda is dealing with a lot of stress because she's going from like the big city basically to like the middle of nowhere, which she's not used to. And, you know, the house is really overgrown and old and stuff needs fixed. And there's like weapons on all the walls and it's like creaky. And Wilfred's late mother has these silent companions. And so this is kind of like it's not like a sequel, I think, but it's related to her other book, The Silent Companions, which I haven't read yet, but I have it on my list because this was really good. And so I did not describe the Silent Companions at all for some reason. Basically, they are wooden standees, cutouts with people painted on them. And so there are some that are just like generic, like a butler, a little boy, etc. So there are the original ones that the mother inherited, and then there are some that she had made to look like real people. You know, while Belinda's trying to make the best of it, her baby's coming, the silent companions are creepy, but like she's trying to ignore all the creepiness. Wilfred's estranged brother Nathan reappears, and of course, Belinda doesn't really know why Nathan was estranged and sent to live in India for multiple decades, but they start to grow close. And so Belinda is learning these family secrets from Nathan, and she's like shocked. And meanwhile, these supernatural things keep happening at the house. And so she's trying to uncover Like, what exactly was it? Because it's like very closely tied to the family history that Wilfred does not want her to learn. Mostly because her mom is like this crazy anxious person. So he's afraid that like Belinda might also go down that road. And also when they were there for their first child's birth, Freddie's birth, she had like a mental breakdown and they attributed it to postpartum, but she's beginning to wonder like maybe all of that was supernatural as well. And so super spooky, super creepy. I loved it. I read it at one go. I was like, perfect amount of supernatural mystery, psychological thrillery stuff. And, you know, it is again one of those that doesn't really like fully explain answers, but you're willing to accept it. You're like, okay, that's fine. I don't need all the details. I know enough to be creeped out. After that, I listened to the Gardeners Club. I'm pretty sure I got it on NetGalley. I don't have it tagged on Goodreads, but it was originally published last year in May. I really liked it. You are following this middle-aged English woman, Jill Swanley, who, per her therapist's request, joins a gardening club. And things immediately spiral out of control, right? So she joins this club called the Bromley Botanists. So they're like kind of like a neighborhood gardening club, and they're in a competition to win the Golden Trowel Award. So it's like which community club makes the best flower displays around their community and like makes things beautiful around where they live. When she and one of the members goes to talk to a friend, they find that this friend, who is actually a pretty major TV celebrity, has been murdered. And they are absolutely shocked by this. The group that the friend belonged to drops out of the competition, and more things start stacking up where the Bromley Botanists thinks that the Croydon group, they're kind of like one of their main rivals other than the celebrities group, might be ramping things up on purpose. Someone throws a brick through their window, you know, their lives are at risk. Seeing Jill like get into gardening as the story goes on was super cute. And, you know, she has a teenage son who is going through some problems because he may or may not have ADHD and it's affecting his schoolwork. Plus, it's been 10 years since her son's father, died. And so it's like, you know, her life's playing out a lot differently than she thought it would originally when she was younger. And so she's like having to deal with that stress and then her ailing mother. And so like, I thought it was like a very realistic look into like the issues people begin to face in middle age. Not that I'm there yet, but you know, I thought it was very well portrayed. And the mystery solving going on felt realistic to these people and their capabilities. Sometimes you read like a mystery and you're like, the stay-at-home mom down the street would not be pulling off these supernatural feats of detective work. Like, what? But the different characters, their experience and motivations, like all kind of fit in really well, I thought, with who's willing to do what when, and like what they're trying to do felt realistic to just normal people in a gardening club. It wasn't like, oh, secretly he's Chuck Norris or something. I thought it was super cute. I did give it 4 stars though, because it felt strange. So there is like a love story arc between Jill and one of the other gardeners, but it just felt really strange because she's very inquisitive. She wants to know the answer. She wants to see proof of everything, except the other gardener guy, he basically tells her like, oh yeah, my relationship with my wife's on the rocks. She's cheating on me. She's kicked me out of the house. And she doesn't ask for any proof of this. Like, not that I disbelieve him, that his, you know, soon-to-be ex-wife is a terrible person to him. But it didn't feel realistic to Jill's personality that she wouldn't want to, like, go spy on the ex-wife or something. Like, she just kind of accepted him at his word and then starts cultivating this romance with him, kind of like in the face of like, am I ready to move on from my late husband? You know, it's been 10 years, but I feel guilty. Like I still have my son and blah, blah, blah. So like that part was very realistic and I liked, but like she didn't want to confirm anything about this guy's backstory at all. She just takes him at face value, and that felt weird. I also just uncomfortable in general with relationships happening between people who are still married. Like, yeah, I know divorce takes a while, but especially when there's no proof that like he's even getting divorced. I don't know. I didn't like that. And I disliked it enough to take a star off. Yeah. But otherwise, I thought it was super fun. Just ignoring the romance arc. After that, I listened to the audiobook for The Two Deaths of Lillian Carmichael by Paulette Kennedy. So this was another NetGalley arc. I got the audiobook, and it was originally published March 10th, so about a month ago. And I finished it like the day after it was published. Another horror novel. I don't know, really. I don't know what was up with me reading all these like kind of scary books. They weren't, I'll be honest, they weren't like super scary. I feel like they were light horror, but that's the kind of horror I like. So this one was also, I don't know, I was just left flabbergasted. So this one is set in 1853 in South Carolina, where we're following Lillian Carmichael, who has been charged with the death of the murder of her younger sister. She tells everyone that she did it because she knows who did, and she doesn't want to reveal that truth for some reason. You know, so in the first chapter, she's walking to the gallows to be hanged, executed for her sister's death. And as she's walking to the gallows, she sees her father and mother looking distraught, and she just becomes so overwhelmed with like the prospect of dying that she passes out. And she awakes, I think it was like 3 or 4 days, and she is in the family mausoleum. So she manages to break out of her coffin and out of the mausoleum, and she, you know, manages to sneak home, get some supplies. She tries living on the streets, but finds it very difficult, and she runs into someone who recognizes her, even though she's disguised herself as a young man. And so she flees across the marshes to live off the land on these like wild little islandy places. Meanwhile, in the city, girls are being killed and drained of their blood. And because someone saw her and recognized her, they are all accusing Lillian of being some sort of monster vampire creature, killing these other girls out of jealousy or something. And of course, Lillian is like, I'm not going around killing everyone. I didn't even kill my sister. Unfortunately, Lillian is injured, and she is rescued by this teenage girl. She was kind of like, they were trading stuff by like putting it out on a tree stump and then leaving, and then the other one would sneak and switch the items, right? And so this girl and her father save Lillian by taking her to this old crumbling plantation where supposedly this man lives after he inherited it from his late lover. And so Lillian and this man become close until it's revealed that the man is actually a woman named Kate O'Malley. And Kate agrees to help her prove that Lillian's not the murderer, because, you know, obviously Kate is like, yeah, I was watching you injured in my guest bedroom while some of these murders happened, and so like I know it's not you. Meanwhile, Lillian is kind of gathering information about her sister's death. So I will say the ending blew me out of the water. I was not, in my wildest dreams, I was not expecting that conclusion. Absolutely wild. I did give this 4 stars because I felt like Lillian made some really dumb decisions, and I couldn't figure out why. So obviously, once she gets out of the mausoleum, she goes home, steals some stuff, but she refuses to leave the city, which is how she gets recognized, because she's just wandering around the streets, sleeping in alleys, trying to barter off these necklaces, but getting told, no, we think you stole them, etc. And she's just like, I can't leave because my mother's still alive. But it's like, you're steadily getting poorer. You're going to starve to death on the streets. She ostensibly, from the beginning, doesn't really have a very positive relationship with her mother. She was definitely like a daddy's girl. So like she loved her dad way more than she loved her mom. But she's like, I can't leave my mother. And it's like, but you're not even there for your mother because you're a fugitive on the run. Why are you so obsessed with staying to support her when y'all can't even talk? You know what I mean? I think it would have been better if Lillian had been trying to escape, but the obstacles kept coming up, preventing her from escaping. There was no reason for her to stay in the area. There was no reason for her to stay for her mom. And then it felt like she would be telling us, I'm going to go do X. And then she starts to go do X. And she makes her way to the scene where X would happen. And she starts to do X. But then randomly she's like, actually, veers off course, does Y. And then chaos ensues. And it's like, what? Why? I didn't think we dug enough into Lillian's psyche for a lot of these decisions to make complete sense. Like, if the scenes had been framed differently, they probably would have been fine. Like, I didn't have an issue with the chaos happening, but I just felt like how we got between X and Y just wasn't very convincing for a lot of these scenes. So yeah, if those had been tweaked a little bit, I would have given this 5 stars probably. I then went on to another T. Kingfisher book because I keep telling myself I'm going to read more. I did Nettle Bone. This is one of her older books. It was published in 2022. And I really liked this one. You could tell it was an older book by her, not quite as developed in her characterization, I think. Essentially, we are following the third princess of this small kingdom who's in a state of stress. Mara's oldest sister went and married a powerful prince of the neighboring kingdom who, through the marriage, promised to protect her small country that has a very good port, basically, is like why all these other countries want it. And so they enter into an alliance with the northern country, but Mara's eldest sister very quickly dies. And so Mara's second sister is sent to marry that same prince. While Mara, basically under the pretense of once the second sister has an heir, so a son, Mara can marry. But until then, Mara can't be a rival, basically, in that regard. So Mara is sent to a convent as a young teenager. And so she spends pretty much all her life there until she is 30, and she travels to see her sister for one of her sister's births. Her sister has had multiple pregnancies that have pretty much all failed at various points. Either she had a stillborn or a miscarriage at some point. And so Mara goes to see her for her successful birth, but realizes that her sister is being severely abused by this prince. And so Mara is determined that she is going to save her sister because selfishly, she knows that if her sister dies, she will be sent to replace her. She will be sent to be the third wife. While also she doesn't want her sister to meet the fate that her eldest sister did. You know, so they're both benevolent and selfish reasons for Mara to do this. But Mara decides to go find a grave witch. And so in this world, ghosts are real. And grave witches are witches of graveyards, cemeteries that kind of, they don't really control the dead, but they can like do stuff with the dead and are supposed to be keeping them calm and down on the ground. Mara is told of this especially powerful grave witch who might be able to help her kill a king, prince, king, prince, king, the heir to the throne. So Mara has to complete 3 impossible tasks before she and the grave witch set off to kill her brother-in-law. And super funny, the grave witch has a chicken that is possessed by a demon. Great side character. And they are joined by a few others to help them on their quest. I didn't think the world building was as well fleshed out as her other fantasy that I have read. But that could just be, you know, it was an earlier work of hers. I did like how all the side characters had their moment to shine, but I did feel like perhaps Mara should have been a little more proactive at certain points. I also kind of felt like the romance was half-baked. I liked it. I liked the characters. I liked their interactions and their chemistry, but I didn't think there was really enough time dedicated to it. It felt a little flimsy, perhaps. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, I thought it was a pretty good story of girl power and like the question of doing something, kind of like the discussion on like what is a moral choice. Like obviously murder's bad, but murder to save lives, maybe okay sometimes, especially with one of the side characters, a fairy godmother. You know, the question of like, yeah, she can do good magic, but also she can do bad magic, and she's better at bad magic. And if she uses the bad magic for a good reason, how do we feel about that? So I thought that conversation, that side of the book, was very interesting and intriguing. I just wish the world building had been a little more fleshed out. I didn't feel like the impossible tasks really tied back to the story so much. I would have liked to see those items tied in more. Yeah, but otherwise, solid read. I liked it. Then Pokopia released. And after you finish the main storyline, it's kind of, I don't know, you're just building. So I wanted an audiobook to listen to. And the first one I could find that sounded interesting on Audible through Kindle Unlimited was First Witches Club by Macy Yates. And I don't really know. And I wasn't really sure how to feel about this one. It was like a contemporary romance novel, but basically it's about 3 women who are all getting divorced around the same time for various reasons. And second chance at love, yada yada, they discover witchcraft. That wasn't what I had an issue with, really. So you're following 3 women, Nora, Daisy, and Soraya, and they're all different. Nora was a foster child who has been in a relationship with this guy who basically told her, like, I don't think we have any connection. I need time for myself to rediscover who I am. And he runs off to like a wellness retreat in Chile. Daisy's husband confesses that he's been having an affair with like this girl in her 20s. And then Soraya's husband sends her a dick pic. But, you know, this is in contrast to like him being extremely religious, and she's like a trad wife, and she knows that the picture was meant for someone else, even though he's trying to pretend like, oh no, it was for you. Like, why would you send me a dick pic of yourself in the middle of church where we both are? So seeing how they all deal with their separate situations based in the context of like their life as they've developed it, was really interesting because they were friends in high school. So it's like they're contrasting their relationships to each other as they've aged, as well as to their husbands, who they all got married pretty young. How that's changed. I liked all that part. And then them getting together and getting jobs at this apothecary that appeared in the middle of their small town. That was all interesting. I liked how that developed. But the love interests were so, I don't know. Nora's was her foster brother from, you know, when they were young, and they've always kind of like had this like codependent relationship, but she's been afraid to like acknowledge that she finds him attractive because then what if that ruins their friendship? He felt like a real person. Their chemistry felt like real people. But Daisy, she gets pursued by her husband's business partner, who's also a celebrity TV star because he was on like the teen drama when they were teenagers. So like everyone had a crush on him 15 years ago, and he's super hot and a billionaire and blah, 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 blah. He didn't feel like a real person. And then Soraya, hers comes in really late, but he swoops in, and he's a divorced doctor who lost his son to cancer, but he's just like super understanding of her like weird religious trad wife past and blah, blah, blah. I don't know. They both like love bomb them and just talk about how much they worship the ground these women walk on when there's zero context to them, to their relationships. Do you know what I mean? So it felt like these 2 men were just like cardboard cutouts being pushed around to be like dreamboats. I don't know. I didn't like that at all. And I'll be honest, I just kind of forwarded through. I was listening to this on audiobook, obviously. I just forwarded through a lot of those scenes because none of them were believable. I don't know. I did end up giving it 3 stars because the main characters were developed in their relationships with each other, but none of the romance, which was kind of the point. Obviously, this was like a romance novel. You could tell that was trying to be like the main selling point of this book, their second chance romances, but none of them felt like they had any substance. if you ignore that part and just focus on them rebuilding, the three women rebuilding their lives with this magical apothecary that teaches them witchcraft, you know, that part was just like a fun little read. After that, I started another arc, The Beheading Game by Rebecca Lehman. It was published March 24th, so a few weeks ago. The Beheading Game is like a speculative historical fiction on what if Anne Boleyn, right? So Henry VIII's decapitated wife came back to life if she didn't die from being beheaded. Essentially, what happens is Anne is beheaded. She wakes up in her coffin, grabs her head, manages to make a break for it, and she escapes the, I forgot the name, but the one near London Bridge. And she, you know, manages to cross the Thames and then realizes like, oh shit, like I need to protect my daughter. Obviously, things are going to go bad for her. Like, you know, Henry's probably going to disinherit her. She's not going to be the heir anymore. Well, I mean, she wasn't really there, but you know what I mean. People might be out for her. Like, I need to go protect my kid. So I want to go kill Henry. And she very quickly realizes that she has absolutely zero life skills and needs to get some help. At the beginning, there was this really weird scene where she is trying to figure out how to cross the London Bridge, right? So she's kind of in the towny area on the other side, and from the Tower of London. She like stumbles across this arena where they pull this like old blind bear in, but they're antagonizing it by like, they're cutting the bear so it's bleeding, and then they release hungry dogs into the arena, and then the hungry dogs are attacking the bear because of the blood, but then the bear attacks the dogs because they're attacking him, and it's just like this huge thing, and she's like disgusted by it because, yeah, that's disgusting. But then randomly halfway through, when the guy next to her starts flirting with her, she's like, this bear is exactly like Henry, and he needs to be put down because he's just becoming more and more dangerous. Then she's cheering as the bear accidentally kills a man. Accidentally. The man attacks the bear on purpose, but then the bear kills him, and everyone's all upset. Like, oh my god, the bear killed a human. Like, they're not torturing a bear in the first place. I don't know. And then she's cheering that this bear is being mutilated. And it's just so weird. I didn't really have an issue with like how her thoughts changed through the scene. Like her conclusion about Henry being dangerous. I just didn't think it made any sense, the thought process we were shown for her to get from point A to point B in that scene. And it definitely made her really unsympathetic to me. Like reading that, I knew like, man, I hate this bitch. Like I'm never gonna like her in this book, which is fine. You don't have to like the main character, I don't think. It was still interesting seeing her thought processes in everything else going on, but I don't know. It was just a really weird scene. I think the scene could have been framed much differently and actually been convincing to me. She basically gets into issues with this guy she hooks up with, sort of. She steals his money, tries to run away, but he tracks her, and this woman who is a prostitute part-time, because apparently that was a thing, helps her, and Anne is like, I will pay you like a shitload of money if you get me across the London Bridge. The other woman agrees to help her, and they get across, you know, the bridge as Anne is kind of like learning about like what life is actually like for the commoners and how political decisions she made shaped what was happening in England at the time. So like all that was really interesting. I just didn't understand the bear scene, and then the romance arc made zero sense. There was like zero lead up to it, and then bam, all of a sudden Anne's in love with someone, and it was just so weird. And then the ending is like some sort of weird fever dream where it just went off the rails. I did not like the ending at all. I think if we cut out that last 10% or whatever, it would have been a lot better. I don't want to spoil the ending, but basically Anne does a thing and then runs off into the sunset. But I didn't think the sunset at any, up until that point, the story we're in, there's no sun. So where did this sunset come from? I don't know. It was weird. Yeah. So I don't know. That made it hard to give this anything other than a 3-star, because the main character is not sympathetic. They try and make you feel sympathy for her instead of just embracing the fact that she's this like morally gray character. The romance made no sense, and then the ethics were really shaky in terms of the whole bear thing, and then what's going. I don't know. I followed this up with another arc that was published March 31st, so it's now available. A Spell for Saints and Sinners by Emily Carpenter. So this was also an audiobook, so I could listen while I was playing Pocopia. And I was really interested in this one because it was described as a gender-flipped EU, but dripping with Southern Gothic atmosphere. I was like, ooh, okay. It's about a young woman in her early 20s. She is a psychic who has taken over her deceased grandmother's psychic business, basically. And of course, she's poor, she's struggling, she owes a lot of property tax on this house, which she wasn't expecting. You know, it was paid off from her grandmother, so she thought, oh, life will be easy living in this paid off house, but the property taxes exist. And so Ingrid is really struggling to balance real life adult responsibilities with being young, kind of her traumatic childhood, being abandoned by her mom, and like how events surrounding that like impacted her life, when one day Edie gets a special client, basically the heiress rich daughter of the local millionaire business owner. Her psychic abilities give her a hint to tell this girl that her friend has betrayed her. And of course, Sailor, the heiress, is super grateful and invites Edie to her, kind of her bachelorette party, except her fiance's there. I don't know. It's like so it's not really a bachelorette party, it's like a pre-wedding party, but Edie goes and ends up being taken kind of under Sailor's wing. Sailor pays her property taxes. Sailor sends her $1,000 a week to have on-call psychic sessions whenever she wants. Sailor takes her on trips. Sailor lets her live with her while her house is being renovated. So Ingrid is going from being poor, struggling to feed herself, to riding the coattails of this millionaire girl who throws money left and right like it's confetti. However, Ingrid's roommate is like really jealous of this. He feels abandoned by Ingrid, and so she's trying to balance her budding friendship with Sailor, her struggling friendship with her roommate, and like how she can use this situation to her advantage to like pave the road to her future for, you know, financial success, right? Retire at 30, basically. And meanwhile, while this is going on, Ingrid is kind of struggling with the memory of her grandmother and like the type of witch her grandma wanted her to be, with the demands of Sailor and this rich family. So she kind of starts going down a dark path, and things are just spiraling out of control. I thought it was super interesting. Okay, so Ingrid's kind of stupid sometimes, but like I can ignore it because she's supposed to be like 22. So like seeing her bad decision making didn't necessarily feel wrong. Like it fit into the story as she's like desperate to find a place where she belongs. So like that's why she's making these bad decisions. I didn't have any issue with that. However, I did feel like the story kind of cut off at the climax and then just ended. It was like it felt like 10% of the story was missing, and then we just flash forward to sort of a blog that kind of gives you an answer on how everything ties up. It was really weird. And so like I sat there days after it finished just feeling like I was left on a cliffhanger. I don't know. It was strange. I also felt like the relationship between Ingrid and her roommate was so toxic, but she was so blind to it. I feel like even though Ingrid made stupid decisions in terms of her interpersonal relationships with Sailor and these rich people, I feel like she would have been more perceptive about her issues with her roommate, if that makes sense. That being said, it was definitely, Goodreads describes it as darkly atmospheric novel of psychological suspense. Like, no, I agree. That's an accurate description. It is set in Savannah, Georgia. I can't tell you how realistically that setting is portrayed, but it definitely impacted a lot of the story. So maybe someone who has been to Savannah or lived there would probably have a better opinion on like how well done the setting is. But as someone who has only ever been to other parts of Georgia, I felt like it was a good portrayal of like my experiences in the South in terms of like climate, buildings, architecture, that sort of thing. I know Savannah is supposed to be like particularly unique in its beauty, its architecture. I've also never seen a practical magic, which is discussed a lot in this book. It's like one of the driving forces behind like culture, I guess, in this neighborhood. So that was funny. After that, I decided to read something that was definitely more high fantasy. So I went with Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross. So this is kind of, from what I understand, it was published after, but it's meant to be like a prequel to her Divine Rivals duology, which I have not read. But I heard this one was really good. And I don't know. Reading it, I really enjoyed it. I liked the prose. I was swept along by the story. I was super into it. But once it ended, I was left feeling kind of like the meat of the story was missing. So Wild Reverence is never established like what world this is in, but you can just assume it's like a complete fantasy world where the gods are kind of described in ways that's reminiscent of like Greek mythology, at least in terms of their lifestyle, but it's pretty ambiguous, the inspiration around the world, I guess, at least the gods. But basically in this world, there are 3 realms: the sky realm, the mortal realm, and then the underling realm. So obviously the sky and the underling are where the gods live. They're kind of separated into like 2 genres of god, basically, where the sky gods take prayers by burning your prayer to them, and the underling ones, you have to bury your prayer into the dirt and it appears in their home. Basically, each god has powers associated with a constellation that they receive when they're born, but it is possible for gods to steal these powers from other gods by killing them. And gods can only die via injury to a specific part of their body, and that part is different for each god depending on their weakness. So basically, it's either their heart or their throat based on like their personality is kind of how it comes off. And we are following the god Matilda. She is born at the beginning of the book, and her mother is keeping her father's identity a secret. And there's kind of something weird about her, but Death, who's like the matriarch of the underling gods, just kind of brushes it off. She's like, I must have been imagining things. But Matilda is perceived as a herald. So when she was born, new stars came up into the sky, right? And that's pretty good. That's mid-level power, not really something people are going to be jealous of. So like it does limit the risk on her life. Her mother is raising her under the ground in their home when Matilda starts getting letters from the goddess of dreams. So her mother kind of has like a friendship with this other goddess, even though everyone's always really suspicious of each other because someone could backstab you and steal your power, right? So the goddess of dreams and sleep is giving these written dreams to Matilda because Matilda's in the dreams. And Matilda's like kind of obsessed, like, oh my gosh, I'm reading all these dreams from this kid who's dreaming of me. It's so weird. Like, how did he even hear of me? Nobody knows who I am, like in the human world. Except like my birth hasn't been announced yet. And while this is going on, Matilda kind of coming into her powers, being trained by the god of war, etc., she uncovers that her mother has this like secret pact with her little clique that she's formed, where they are harvesting scales from the Aethral, which are these dragons who are kind of the thralls of the head underling god. And so he has like a tight leash on these dragon creatures so that nobody can take their scales, obviously, because these scales are the only thing that can kill a god, like surefire. And so her mother and her partners are managing to steal a scale every once in a while, once a year or two. And they are bargaining them away to the Skyland gods, which is like super illegal. And one of their head god, Dacre's, like biggest secrets basically about these Eithreal scales. And Matilda uncovers this, and accidentally in one of the dreams, because she has uncovered, like if she goes to the mortal realm, there's a door she can go through and be in this boy Vincent's dreams. And she accidentally tells him in one of the dreams where they see an Eithreal about how they can kill, which signifies to the goddess of dreams she knows who is stealing the scales. She probably knows who is buying the scales too. And so her mother knows people have found out about the scales. So she's trying to figure out what to do to cover it up when Matilda goes to her and one of her partners and is like, oh my God, they know it was us because I said it in a dream to somebody, and you know, the goddess of dreams is reading these dreams that I'm in and blah, blah, blah. When the partner kills Matilda's mother and Matilda is forced to flee the underground. And so from then on, Matilda is kind of like thrown into the forefront of the world of the gods. And she also loses contact with Vincent. So the story really picks up when Vincent and Matilda are reunited about 10, 15 years in the future. So now they're both adults, even though Matilda's an immortal god, whatever. And Matilda decides to get involved with the mortal world, despite her father, who she has now met, strongly encouraging her otherwise. And things just start piling up, going left right after that. And I don't know, like I loved the prose and the reading experience, but I just like sitting here with the story afterwards, I feel like we were just so detached from Matilda. Nothing ever hit emotionally. There was like two scenes where I felt her emotion, and that was like when her mom was killed and then a scene later on. But otherwise, like I could tell these things were supposed to be emotional, but she didn't really react. Other people weren't really reacting. She would say that she was feeling things, but you didn't see it. I don't know. Like I felt like now that I'm sitting with it, there's just flesh missing from this story. Vincent's point of view that we get several times was much more convincing. And I think maybe it had to do with him being human versus her being a god, which is kind of one of my issues with stories that have non-human POV characters, because either they're just like humans, so it's kind of like, what's the point of them being, you know, like I don't believe this is a 1,000-year-old vampire king, or it feels like not as much, there just isn't enough depth to give them that superhuman feeling with enough explanation for you to believe the weird logic behind their decisions, if that makes sense. It also felt like everything works out in Matilda's favor with very little struggle on her part. Like, she struggles, she gets hurt, but she heals. Someone heals her. Someone comes up with the answer. It's like she never makes attempts that don't work in her benefit. Does that make sense? Like, she needs this item, so she goes to fight for this item, and even though she's hurt, she got the item. So now her problem is solved for whatever arc this is. Every time. And so there's like a big reveal about like what her second power is, and it's just like, it took away a lot of the suspense because she successfully uses it multiple times. And you're like, okay, that really takes the fight out of this story, because I know she never fails at doing this. So I don't know. I am still interested in reading Divine Rivals and, you know, that duology. I'm curious to see how it ties together. The epilogue does flash forward into the future, like hundreds of years. So I'm assuming that's when Divine Rivals takes place. But yeah, I don't know. And after this finished, I just had a hard time wondering why we were even told her story. And perhaps that's my fault for reading this first before Divine Rivals. We will see. But yeah, it just kind of felt like the story just told me that she actually isn't that important. I don't know. That's what I got from this. We'll see. I'll try reading Divine Rivals when I get it on Libby, but who knows? So I'm kind of like, did it deserve the 4.31 rating on Goodreads or not? I don't know. I thought it was technically well written. The final book I read in March was A Staged Death by Samantha Larson. I did not know that this was like the 4th book in a series, because on Goodreads it's not linked to the series it's a part of. But that didn't actually impact the reading experience for me. It does explain any info you need from the previous books in this one. I'm not opposed to reading the other books, but this was a cozy historical mystery. It's set in 1787 in Bath, England. So that was fun. You're following a woman, I think she's established to be in her late 30s, Tiffany Lathrop. And she, is going about her life when she is invited by her dear friend, Mr. Montague, along with her husband, Samir, to go to Bath, which, was like the social scene in the 1700s. And Thomas Montague has asked her to come because Tiffany is good friends with his mother, Catherine, the Marchioness of Harwood. And he wants Tiffany to convince his mother to let him marry an actress. If you're unaware, actresses had a very bad reputation throughout much of history in Europe. They were heavily associated with sex workers, etc. I guess if you watched Bridgerton, you were clued in on that. But yeah, so Tiffany agrees because in a previous book, apparently Thomas's fiance died. And so Tiffany's like, this is his second chance at love. Like, I'll do whatever I can to, A, make sure his fiance is a good woman, B, make sure he's happy, right? So they all go to Bath, where immediately upon trying to find his fiance, Rosalind Arden, stumble across a murdered body, a dead person who is dressed to look like Rosalind. And it turns out that this is her understudy actress within the same acting troupe. And so they have to uncover, was this an attempt on Rosalind's life? Was this just, because Julia, the murdered girl, was kind of a bad person? She may have been blackmailing people. What's going on? Tiffany is like a really kind of spunky character. And while this is going on, there's suspicious stuff happening within the acting troupe. They also uncover a lot of family drama between Rosalind and her parents, who abandoned her 9 years before. So Tiffany is kind of like having to investigate 2 things at once, like what actually happened with Rosalind a decade ago, what's actually happening with this acting troupe and the leader and their connections to these nobility. And meanwhile, she is also learning for the first time, because she, it was not originally, she's not nobility. She, had a hard life growing up. So she's never been to Bath. She doesn't know anything about Bath. So it was fun getting that like cultural knowledge. Also, I've never been to Bath. So that made the story fun. If you're looking for a cozy historical mystery, I definitely recommend it. I thought it was super fun, super cute. I'm definitely interested in reading the other books by her. I think there are 4 and this is the 5th one. Man, I've been talking for 2 hours. My mouth is so dry. Hopefully you check out some of these books if they sounded interesting to you. That is all for now. I will see you next time.